What happens when a man with a badge and a chip on his shoulder pulls over the wrong car on the wrong evening and spends the next 6 months watching his entire career unravel in slow motion? It started on a Tuesday evening in late October, the ET kind of evening where the Georgia sky bruises purple before it goes dark, and the highway stretches out long and quiet like a ribbon nobody bothered to fold. Governor Constance Elaine Beaumont was driving herself that night, which was unusual. She preferred it sometimes, especially after long days when the weight of being the first black woman elected governor of Georgia sat a little heavier than usual. No motorcade, no escort, just her dark blue state-issued sedan and a playlist of old Nina Simone songs keeping her company on the 40-minute drive back to the mansion from a rural education summit in Macon. She wasn't in a hurry. She wasn't on the phone. She wasn't doing anything except driving the speed limit on a near-empty stretch of Highway 41 with her mind already on tomorrow's budget review and the stack of policy briefs her chief of staff had emailed at 9 that morning. That was when the blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Constance blinked once, checked her speed, checked her mirrors. Pulled over the way anyone would, steady and deliberate, onto the shoulder of the road. She rolled down her window halfway and sat with both hands visible on the steering wheel. She had done nothing wrong, and she knew it. But she also knew how fast wrong could be invented when someone with a badge decided they didn't like the way you looked. The officer who climbed out of the patrol car was Corporal Raymond Hicks, 38 years old, 11 years on the force assigned to a district just outside Bibb County. He walked with that particular kind of slowness some officers use to remind you who controls the moment. Flashlight in one hand, expression already set before he even reached her window. He wasn't curious. He wasn't cautious. He was annoyed, like she had interrupted something important by existing on this road at this hour. "License and registration," he said. "No hello. No ma'am." Just the words, flat and cold, the flashlight aimed directly at her face. Constance didn't flinch. She'd been in rooms full of people who looked at her the same way. She knew the look. "Officer," she said evenly, "may I ask why I'm being stopped?" He squinted. "You were swerving." She hadn't been swerving. She said so, calmly. He said it again. Swerving, like repeating it would make it true. Constance reached slowly for the glove compartment, narrating every move the way she had learned to do years ago when she was a young attorney driving home late from the public defender's office and got stopped 3 times in 2 months for nothing. "I'm reaching for my documents," she said, voice steady, eyes forward. She handed them over. Hicks took them without looking at her, flipped through the registration, glanced at the license, and then stopped. His eyes moved back to the name, then to her face, then back to the name. Something shifted in his expression. But it wasn't respect. It wasn't recognition. It was something closer to irritation, like the name was a complication he hadn't budgeted for. "This your vehicle?" he asked. "It's a state vehicle," she replied. He handed the documents back. "Step out of the car for me." Constance went still. "On what basis?" "Ma'am, I'm asking you to step out." She looked at him directly. "I am the governor of this state. I would like to know the legal basis for asking me to exit a state vehicle when I have not been cited for any infraction." Hicks leaned slightly forward, hand dropping toward his belt. Not on anything but close enough to be a message. And the message was clear. He didn't care who she was, or maybe he did, and that was exactly the problem. What happened next was quiet. No shouting, no drama. Just a woman who had spent 30 years learning how to make power uncomfortable without raising her voice. She reached for her phone, opened the camera, and hit record. "Just so we have an accurate account of this interaction," she said. Hicks stared at the phone. His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. But he didn't back down. Not yet. Because men like Hicks never back down first. That was the whole problem. But here's what he didn't know. Here's what would keep him awake for the next 6 months. This wasn't just a woman with a phone. This was the governor of Georgia. And somewhere 2 exits back, her security detail, running behind because she'd asked for 20 minutes alone, had just gotten a notification from the car's GPS system that her vehicle was stationary on Highway 41. They were already turning around. Corporal Raymond Hicks had never been the kind of man who thought much about consequences. That wasn't arrogance exactly. It was something more ingrained than that, something that had been reinforced for 11 years by a system that looked the other way when he got too rough, too quick, too sure of himself. He had 4 complaints, on record. 4. 1 from a black pastor he'd pulled out of a car and handcuffed in front of his congregation over an expired tag. 1 from a Latina schoolteacher he'd reduced to tears over a broken taillight. 2 others that had been quietly resolved before they got anywhere serious. Nothing had stuck. Nothing had cost him anything, which is exactly why he had stopped believing that anything ever would. When he got back to the station that night after the stop on Highway 41, he didn't mention it to anyone at first. Logged the stop. Wrote up a report. Failure to cooperate with a lawful order. Possible obstruction. No arrest made. Slid the body cam onto the charger and grabbed a cup of coffee. His partner Castillo glanced over from across the room. "You have a stop out on 41 tonight?" Hicks shrugged. "Yeah. Woman in a state sedan. Acting like she owned the road." Castillo frowned. "State sedan as in state government?" Hicks took a long sip of his coffee. "Everybody thinks they own something out here." Castillo didn't push it, but he looked uncomfortable. That particular kind of uncomfortable that happens when someone close to a fire can already smell the smoke. The next morning it hit. The news not from Constance. She hadn't called a press conference, hadn't posted anything on social media, hadn't sent a statement. She had simply gone home, showered, sat at her desk at 6:30 a.m., and made 3 phone calls. 1 to the State Attorney General, 1 to the chairman of the Georgia Law Enforcement Oversight Board, 1 to her senior legal counsel. By the time Hicks sat down at his desk with his second coffee, the headline was already running on the local Fox affiliate. Governor Beaumont stopped by state trooper in Bibb County incident under review. He stared at the screen. Then his supervisor, Captain Doreen Marks, walked in, closed the door behind her, and said, "Raymond, we have a problem." The problem, as it turned out, was bigger than 1 stop on 1 highway. The body cam footage had been pulled. The governor's own phone footage had been secured by her legal team. 2 witnesses in a passing car had come forward after seeing the flashing lights and recognized the governor's vehicle. And a clerk at a gas station a quarter-mile down the road had captured the whole stop on the store's exterior security camera. Grainy but clear enough to tell the story. The story was not good for Raymond Hicks. Hicks leaned back in his chair and said the same thing men in his position always say. "I was doing my job. I didn't know who she was. I treated her like anyone else." Marks looked at him for a long time. "That's the part that worries me, Ray. Because looking at this footage, it seems like that might be exactly true." Constance Elaine Beaumont had not planned to become a symbol when she ran for governor. She had planned to fix the crumbling rural school, infrastructure, expand Medicaid, reform a prison system that had been broken since before she was born, and get home in time for dinner at least twice a week. She was practical, she was organized, she had a mind like a steel filing cabinet, everything in its place, everything with a purpose. But she was also the daughter of a man who had been turned away from a polling station in 1968, and the granddaughter of a woman who had cleaned offices in the state capitol for 30 years without ever being allowed to walk through the front door. Those things didn't leave you. They lived in the body the way old injuries do. You didn't always feel them, but they were there. The morning after the stop, she sat in her office and her chief of staff, Marcus Webb, came in, concerned, already half apologetic on behalf of the world. She waved him off before he could speak. "I need the full complaint process, Marcus," she said. "I want to understand exactly how this works from the inside." He hesitated. "Governor, you don't have to make this public. We could handle it quietly and internally." She looked at him with that calm that made people in her cabinet sometimes feel like they were being very gently corrected. She wasn't angry. She wasn't theatrical. But when Constance Beaumont had made up her mind about something, the room tended to get very still. "I'm not doing this quietly," she said. "Not because I'm angry. Because the next person he pulls over won't." Have a body camera and a legal team and a security detail 2 minutes behind them, and they'll have no one. Marcus nodded and left without another word. The formal complaint was filed by the end of the day. Civil rights violation. Racial discrimination in the application of a traffic stop. Abuse of officer authority. The Georgia Law Enforcement Oversight Board announced an investigation within 48 hours. The State Attorney General's office followed 24 hours after that. And then, because these things had a way of climbing, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division sent a quiet inquiry to the Georgia State Patrol. None of it was loud. None of it was rushed. It was methodical. It was thorough. And it was coming straight for Raymond Hicks like a freight train he had not heard until it was already in the station. Back at the precinct, things changed in ways nobody talked about directly. Rookies who used to joke around with Hicks got quiet when he walked in. Castillo started taking his lunch outside. Captain Marks was polite but formal now, the way people get when they're being careful about what they're seen standing next to. Hicks told himself it would blow over, that the governor was doing this for attention, for politics, for the headlines. He told himself he hadn't done anything that hadn't been done 100 times before on that same stretch of highway. And that was the most chilling part of all. He was right. He hadn't done anything that hadn't been done 100 times before. That was exactly what Constance was counting on. The hearing was held in Atlanta at the state capitol offices of the Oversight Board. It wasn't a criminal trial. It was something in some ways more precise. A formal administrative proceeding with attorneys on both sides, documented evidence presented in sequence, and a panel of 7 board members whose job was to determine whether Raymond Hicks had violated the rights of the governor of Georgia and whether the pattern of behavior documented in his prior complaints constituted a systemic failure of oversight by his department. Hicks came in with his union attorney Gerald Fossey, a compact man in his 50s with an expensive haircut and the kind of practiced calm that came from spending a career defending the indefensible and winning more than he lost. Foss had looked at the footage. He had reviewed the complaints. He had sat across from his client and explained very carefully what they were facing. Hicks had nodded through all of it like a man who still hadn't quite internalized that this was real. Constance walked in wearing a charcoal gray suit, her natural hair pinned back, her governor's seal pin on her lapel. No drama, no entourage beyond her attorney and Marcus. She sat at the presenting table and opened a folder and did not look at Hicks once. The footage played first. All of it. The body cam from Hicks' cruiser, the recording from her phone, the gas station camera showing the length of the stop, the posture, the hand near the belt, 7 minutes of video that told a story with no ambiguity. Then Constance spoke. She walked the board through the stop the way you walk someone through a deposition. Dates, times, precise sequence of events. She did not editorialize. She did not raise her voice. She told them exactly what happened in exactly the order it happened, and she let the evidence do what evidence does when it is sufficient. And then she said something that made the room go very quiet. "I want to be direct with this board," she said, her voice measured and clear. "I am not here because my feelings were hurt. I am not here because I expect special treatment as governor. I am here because I know that what happened to me on that highway happens every single day to people who have no title, no legal team, and no security detail. People who lose their jobs after being arrested for nothing. People who spend nights in county jail over invented traffic violations. People who don't get to come home and make 3 phone calls. I am using my position to say out loud what most people in this state can only say to their families at the kitchen table." The board chair, a retired federal judge named Eloise Grantham, didn't move for a moment. Then she made a note. Slowly. Deliberately. Hicks's attorney had his chance. He argued protocol. He argued officer discretion. He suggested the stop had been routine and that the escalation was a result of what he called non-compliance. He never used the word race. He was too careful for that. But the board could do arithmetic. One of the board members, a black woman in her late 50s named Dr. Patricia Corley, leaned forward and asked Hicks's attorney a single question. Of the 11 stops Corporal Hicks escalated to a request to exit the vehicle in the past 18 months, How many of the drivers were black? Fossey adjusted his notes. He didn't answer immediately. Dr. Corley waited. 9, he finally said. 9 out. Of 11, she said. He nodded. She sat back. Nobody in the room said anything for a long moment. They didn't need to. The board deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the room was fuller than it had been for the hearing. Press had been allowed in for the reading of the findings. Hicks sat very still. Constance sat the same way she always sat, straight, composed, already thinking 3 steps ahead. The board chair, Eloise Grantham, read the findings into the record. The board finds by a vote of 6-1 that Corporal Raymond Hicks did violate the civil rights of Governor Constance Beaumont during a traffic stop on October 17th. The board further finds that the pattern of escalation in Corporal Hicks's traffic stop history demonstrates a statistically significant and troubling disparity that rises to the level of discriminatory conduct. The board recommends immediate suspension without pay, pending a full departmental review. The board further recommends mandatory retraining for the entire Bibb County District and the implementation of an independent audit of traffic stop data across the district for the past 5 years. Hicks didn't move. Fossey put a hand on his arm. Constance received the findings with a nod so small you almost missed it. Outside the building, the reporters gathered, microphones extended, cameras clicking. One of them asked Constance how she felt about the outcome. She paused at the top of the steps and looked out across the courtyard, the gold dome of the Capitol building catching the afternoon sun behind her. "I feel the same way I felt when this started," she said. "I feel like we have a lot of work to do. A ruling is not reform. A suspension is not a system change. The next step isn't celebrating. It's building." Someone shouted from the back of the crowd, "Is this political?" She turned toward the voice without hurrying. "Everything is political," she said. "The question is whether it's also right." And she walked down the steps to her car. Raymond Hicks suspended. Stripped of his duty weapon while under review, his union filed the appeal within a week. Most people who followed the story expected the appeal to amount to something, to muddy the outcome, to slow it down. It didn't. The audit of district traffic stop data came back, and it was worse than anyone had publicly said. A task force was assembled. 2 other officers were flagged for similar patterns. The department issued a sweeping new policy on traffic stop procedures. Body cam footage review was made mandatory within 24 hours of any stop, resulting in a request to exit the vehicle. Hicks quietly resigned before the departmental review concluded. He didn't make a statement, didn't give interviews. Just handed in his badge and disappeared from the public record the way men like him often do when the shield stops working. Quietly, quickly, and with the particular kind of silence that comes not from dignity, but from the absence of anything left to say. 3 months after the hearing, Constance stood at a podium in front of a packed high school gymnasium in Albany, Georgia. It wasn't a political event. It was a town hall for a rural community fighting to keep its only public hospital from closing, the kind of work that didn't make national news but was the reason she had gotten into politics in the first place. After the formal part of the event, a young woman came up to her, maybe 22 years old, eyes serious. Something rehearsed in the way she stood, like she had been working up to this moment. "Governor," she said, "I wanted to thank you. I got stopped last year. Nothing happened. Nothing happened to the officer, She paused. "I filed a complaint and they told me it wasn't enough to pursue. And then I watched what you did and I went back. And this time they took it seriously. And She stopped, her throat working. Constance looked at her for a moment, then reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. "You did that," she said. "You went back. That's the part that mattered." The young woman nodded. "You made it feel possible." Constance held her gaze. "It always was possible. We just made it visible." She meant that. Because this was never about one officer or one stop on one highway. It was about the 10,000 stops that never made the news. The 10,000 people who went home that night and said nothing because they had learned that saying something cost more than they could afford to spend. The ones who swallowed it and moved on and carried it and never got asked how it felt. She was asking now. That was the whole point. She was in a position to ask in a way that got answered, and she intended to keep asking until the answer changed. Back in her office the week after the Albany town hall, she sat with Marcus going through the new traffic stop transparency bill her team had been drafting. It was detailed. It was specific. It tied funding to compliance. It required independent audits. It had teeth. Marcus looked at the final draft and said, "This is going to be a fight." Constance uncapped her pen. "Good," she said. He looked up. "You sure?" She looked back at him across the stack of papers and the policy briefs and the coffee that had gone cold again. She looked at him the way her grandmother must have looked walking into the state capitol through the front door for the first time. "I've been fighting since before they let me in the room," she said. "The fight doesn't scare me. What scares me is the day I stop thinking it matters." She signed the draft. The bill passed 8 months later. It was called the Traffic Stop Transparency and Accountability Act. It was the most comprehensive reform of traffic stop policy in Georgia's history. Its implementation was mandatory. Its audits were independent. Its penalties for non-compliance were real. And it started on a dark stretch of Highway 41 on a Tuesday evening in October, when a man with a flashlight and 11 years of unchallenged authority shone a light in the wrong woman's face and found out that some people don't just absorb the moment. Some people build something out of it. Here's the thing about power. Real power. Not the kind that comes with a badge or a title or a spot on a roster, but the kind that lives in how you move through the world when the pressure is on. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't need to. It just shows up, steady and clear, and does what it came to do. Constance Beaumont didn't stop Raymond Hicks that night. She just didn't let him go on believing that what he had done was invisible. And in a world that had spent a long time making certain people believe their pain was invisible, that was everything. If you've ever been told your experience doesn't count, if you've ever been told the complaint isn't enough to pursue, if you've ever gone home and said nothing because you thought nothing would come of it, this is for you. Keep the receipts. Know your rights. Go back. Because the door doesn't always open the first time, but it opens.